Okay, we were finishing with Truman's Fair Deal. I'll just reread it again because it was kind of cut off, I think, in the last video. After his surprise victory, Truman tried to push for passage of more reforms in the spirit of the New Deal. In his January 1949 State of the Union address to Congress, the president said, "Every segment of our population and every individual has a right to expect from his government a fair deal." In his Fair Deal proposals, Truman pressed for jobs and housing for the poor and working class, more funding for education, fair hiring practices for minorities, broader Social Security coverage, a higher minimum wage, and a national health insurance program. But Congress was in no mood to cooperate and passed very few of the president's proposals. In part, the Fair Deal failed because increasing Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union took much of the president's energy away from fighting for change at home. The Cold War heats up. Oh, let's read Underestimating Truman first. Harry Truman was an easy man to underestimate. Compared to Franklin Roosevelt, a giant on the world stage, Truman seemed plain and unpolished. But this native Missourian and veteran of World War I had unseen strengths. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, was surprised to find him a man of immense determination. He was scrupulously honest. Although he had not attended college, he read everything he could find. In time, Americans came to admire the entire Truman family, including the blunt and outspoken First Lady, Bess, whom the president jokingly referred to as the boss, and their daughter Margaret, whom he called the boss's boss. Cold War heats up. In 1949, American officials received some deeply disturbing news. Spy Actually, let's stop here for a minute because I think we're going to read this in the next lesson. Hold on a second while I check. Yes, we're going to start this with the next lesson. So we're finishing up lesson 4.01. Let's go back here. We have to complete the Cold War online activity and complete the Berlin Airlift online activity. So after you finish today's reading assignment, turn to the screen to complete the Cold War online activity and continue to the rest of the lesson. Let's look at this. The end of World War II saw the emergence of two new superpowers, the democratic, capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. Their bitter rivalry would shape much of the modern era. Each nation worked to gain allies and spread their own philosophies of government and economics. This dangerous era of competition and mistrust came to be called the Cold War, a war of words and ideas. But at times, the hostile relations between the two superpowers threatened to turn into open warfare. Click Next. Europe. At the end of World War II, the Soviets occupied much of Eastern and Central Europe. Stalin had agreed to allow free elections in occupied countries, but instead he set up communist governments. Soviet forces remained in the region. Distrust grew between the Soviet Union and Western nations and split Europe in two, capitalist countries in the West and Soviet-controlled communist countries in the East. As Winston Churchill declared, an Iron Curtain had descended on Europe. Click each rectangle on the map key for additional information about the alliances that existed in Europe during the Cold War. Okay, so let's look at our map. We have the green, which is NATO, which would be the democratic allies of the United States, the Warsaw Pact, which would be the communist allies of the Soviet Union, and then non-allied countries in white, which means they didn't pick a side at that time. So looking at the green, we have Portugal, France, United Kingdom, Norway, Denmark, West Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, Greece, Turkey. There might be some smaller ones, but that's the main ones. Okay, so let's click on NATO. In April 1949, the United States, Canada, and 10 Western European nations signed a pact establishing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. NATO nations agreed to help defend each other from Soviet aggression. Now, Warsaw Pact, the pink. So we have East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and other communist governments of Eastern Europe established the Warsaw Pact in 1955. They formed this alliance when West Germany joined NATO. The Warsaw Pact nations agreed to defend each other against Western nations. The Soviets controlled a military force established by Warsaw Pact nations. And then the non-aligned. Some European nations, such as Spain and Austria, did not join NATO or the Warsaw Pact. In effect, these nations remained neutral during the Cold War. And we'll see that we have Spain, Switzerland, of course, always neutral, Austria, Yugoslavia, Sweden, Finland, and Ireland. And that's it. That's it for this activity. Moving on. The Berlin Airlift. The Berlin Airlift was the British and American response to the Soviet blockade of the former German capital. Brought on by a disagreement over changing currency, the Soviets intended to starve the people and limit commerce. The airlift, called Operation Vittles, was a serious effort to supply the city, especially with food. Okay, follow the directions of the Berlin Airlift sheet to complete this activity. You will also need the following website: American Experience, the Berlin Airlift. So we'll see, here's the site, and there are 4 parts: the introduction, the airlift begins, escalation, and the airlift ends. Okay, so if you would go to your lesson resources, be sure that you filled out your reading guide and checked your answers with the lesson answer key. And then here's the Berlin Airlift sheet, and it's divided: introduction question, airlift begin questions, escalation, airlift ends. It's all divided in there. So follow along with the website and answer those questions, and I do believe the answers for that would also be found on the lesson answer key. Yep. So you can also find your questions there if you're having any problems. So that is the end of the lesson. Be sure to take the 401 checkpoint, and best of luck to you.